Hey everybody! Today we're going to be reviewing Doctor Strange. I gotta say, I really liked this movie. Maybe more than I should have, but I do really like this movie. I think it's going to be one of the best Marvel movies out there for a while. Um, I don't think it's as good as Guardians of the Galaxy, but we'll get into that. So this first part's going to be spoiler free, and you'll see this on the screen. No spoilers. And then when I get into spoilers, I'll put this up so that you guys know that I'm going to be talking about spoilers. But first, we'll talk about no spoilers. So this is directed by Scott Derrickson, and of course has Benedict Cumberbatch, Rachel McAdams, Mads Mikkelsen as the bad guy, and Tilda Swinton, who played the Ancient One. But two characters that I really want to point out that I thought were great were, how do you pronounce his name? It's like Chiwetel Ejiofor, I think is how it is. He was in 12 Years a Slave, and he played Mordo. And then Benedict Wong, who played Wong. And I guess I want to say Wong is one of my favorite characters in the movie. I love Wong. The interaction between Doctor Strange and Wong was great, but we'll get into some of that later. The movie, of course, takes place over Doctor Strange, and he starts out as this doctor. He's a surgeon. He's very cocky, egotistical, think he can't do no wrong. And then he gets into a car accident, and his hands are basically shattered. Like all the tendons, the bones, everything is just shattered. They have him pinned together like it looked like a robot almost, just a whole bunch of nails pinned in him just to keep his hands from being amputated. And he can't get his mobility back enough to become a surgeon again. And so he goes in search for this more spiritual healing he didn't know of at the time. He thought that they would just be able to heal him. And then it turns out that no, it's more of a spiritual thing, and he thought it was fake. A lot of that's in the trailer. But basically, he ends up becoming a believer and learning how to gain these powers. Now, one of the things I was worried about when I saw the trailer was I was worried he would just show up. He would be like, no, there's no such thing as the spiritual world. And then she shows him, and then he's like, oh my gosh. And then the next scene is he knows everything. Like there's no learning curve whatsoever. It's just all he needs is one experience, and now he's a master. And they didn't do that. In the movie, what they did is she asked him, like, how did you become a surgeon? And he said, years of study and practice. And she's like, so they had like a whole bunch of scenes of him at the monastery doing, reading as much as he can, absorbing all of this material, practicing, trying to get past his own mental barriers. And I'm glad that they did that. And during that whole sequence, we got to learn about one of my favorite characters, Wong, who was the librarian. And he was very, like stone, hard. He never cracked a smile or laughed very much. And his interaction between him and Doctor Strange was awesome. Now, there's not a lot of humor in this movie, but the humor they do have is on point. And with a movie like this, it's very easy for the humor to become just silly. And then it takes away from the whole story, especially if you've got somewhat of a seriousness trying to go on with the movie and the way that they talk and the dialogue that they say, and then they jump into some silly thing that happens because of a comedy relief character. It kind of pulls you out of the whole seriousness of the action sequence or the bad guy moment and all that. But they didn't do that in this movie. All of the humor was very real to the characters, and it didn't interfere with anything that was going on. It just accentuated. And it accentuated characters and accentuated moments in the movie. The cape was also really funny. A cape, which the cape reminded me a lot of the TV movies, The Librarian. If you have ever seen those, I would check them out if you like those kind of things. But in The Librarian, King Arthur's sword has a mind of its own. It flies around. It plays with the librarian. You know, they have little sword fights. It's like his best friend. And in this movie, the cape is the same thing. And I love the stuff that the cape does. It did make me laugh out loud. The 3D in this movie actually makes it worth it, which is very unusual for me. I'm not a big fan of the 3D movies. I think it's just a gimmick for the most part. Most movies aren't designed for the 3D, so it's just an afterthought to get more money out of the ticket holders. And there haven't been very many movies I've seen in 3D where I was like, that was worth it. Most of the time I'm like, I could see it in 2D, it'd be just as fine. But there's two movies I've seen in the theater where I thought, yes, the 3D made a difference. And the first one was Avatar. But of course, James Cameron's company invented the whole 3D camera and helped develop the real 3D to begin with. So it makes sense, Avatar. And this movie, Doctor Strange, utilized the 3D very well and smart. It's not like, Friday the 13th 3D where they're just poking sticks towards the camera and coming back all cheesy like. They really utilize the 3D in the moments that you would need the 3D, like when they're warping space, when they're warping the buildings and everything. So you have that moment like this where the buildings are moving like you had in the trailer and everything. And those sequences reminded me a lot of a lithograph called Relativity by M.C. Escher. And for those of you that haven't seen this lithograph, I think it's very famous, but the whole idea is, everything is relative to where you are. So you see like the people that are walking on the stairs, but they're at a 90-degree angle, and then down at the bottom you have someone walking upstairs and someone walking down, going all on where they are. And they did a lot of that in the movie where gravity really kind of morphed and moved around with the buildings. And so you would have some people walking on the ceiling and some people walking on the side of the wall. And the whole time I saw it, I thought it looked great, especially in the 3D, but it kept bringing me back to this lithograph. And where I saw it last time, I've seen it before during Labyrinth. They did that in Labyrinth. And I was like, oh yeah. But they did it straight from the lithograph in Labyrinth. Doctor Strange, it was, the buildings and everything. But the idea is the same. But it makes sense. It's not like they stole the idea or anything like that. It made sense and it made me think of that. So that's why I was looking at it. Overall, I really liked the movie. There were a couple of things that I didn't really like. For one, we had another big glowy thing in the sky, which Marvel seems to have a problem with that. So they had another thing in the sky that was big and glowy, and that was the ominous thing that we all had to worry about. But when I was thinking about it, it kind of makes sense, or it does make sense, because he's going between dimensions, in the multiverse. How do you show that he's going between dimensions in the multiverse unless you have some kind of a entrance? So I can excuse it, but I will want to tell Marvel, please stop putting big glowy things in the sky and give us something else. Seems like every movie's either got a beam of light or big and glowy in the sky. Stop doing it. Do something different. But I think I'm going to start getting into some possible spoilers. So I'll give my rating. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. Some of the stuff I had a problem with, I'll talk about in the spoiler section. But I'm going to give it a good solid 8.5 out of 10. I liked it. I thought it was great. Up there in the top 5 for the Marvel movies that we've gotten. So there we go. Now we're going to jump into spoilers. So, spoiler alert! Don't watch this next part unless you want to know. Ah. Okay. So, the bad guy is not only Mads Mikkelsen, which he did a really good job. I was a little worried that his villain would be too one-dimensional. But he did have some layers in there, which we didn't really peel back until the third act of the movie. For the first two acts of the movie, he just seemed like this evil person that people talked about, but we didn't really get any characterization from him until, they revealed that that Tilda Swinton, that the Ancient One, was actually utilizing some of these dark powers from another universe to stay alive. And he wanted that power. Now, we knew he wanted the power, but we didn't really know that she was using it as well. And it kind of gave more motivation to his character. But before that, he was just a standard bad guy. Then once we got the reveal, it was like, okay, it makes more sense why he is driven towards this. Because he wants to live forever like she does, and he feels that she has hidden that power from him. One of the things I was disappointed in, though, is when we had the big villain reveal, the villain that Mikkelsen was trying to connect with to get the long life, was basically a big face in the air. And so they had Doctor Strange basically mentally fighting with this big face that was in the air in the other dimension. And it seemed like a cop-out to me. There's a lot of movies that utilize the big ominous something or other, but they don't really dwell into it. So you have no emotion towards this villain whatsoever. You don't care about this villain. It's just a big face, or it's a cloud of smoke, or there's nothing to put characterization to. So in this movie, it was just a big face, and Doctor Strange basically annoyed it into agreeing with him. So I was against that decision. I was like, nah, it didn't work for me. But it didn't ruin the ending of the movie. It was just like, oh, that bad guy sucks. But it was short, and then we moved back and we're okay. But it did kind of ruin the ending of the movie for me, because it felt like they were pumping up to something big, and then it just deflated a bit. And it kind of fell flat, in my opinion. But the end credit scenes, and you have to stay. There's two end credit scenes. There's one after the first part where they do the regular scroll of the director and the music and everything, the pretty one. They have one right after that, and it's basically a humorous one between Doctor Strange and Thor, where he gives Thor this glass of beer, and every time he drinks it down, it refills itself. And then there's one after the regular scroll credits, and that one has Mordo becoming the new villain. And I would have rather have that as the ending of the movie instead of after the credits. Because through the whole movie, he's like one of the good guys that you're fighting for, and you can see his, like, the fact that he's disappointed in the Ancient One, but he's still got all of these strong ideals. And for that world in his head to get shattered, and then him basically become the villain, I loved that. So I loved the end credits scene more than I did the actual big face villain that they tricked or got a deal made with for the ending of the regular movie. So I would have rather had that earlier. That was great. Now, I don't really have much more on spoilers. For the most part, the story is pretty straightforward. It's pretty predictable for the most part. If you've seen the trailers, you probably know where the movie goes, just for some character arcs and things like that. But again, I give it an 8.5. I would go watch it again. And I highly, highly suggest that you see it in 3D. because the utilization of the 3D, especially when they're doing the space warping with the buildings and everything, awesome, so awesome. And my friend Ted, who saw it with me, his favorite 3D moment was in the beginning where he's having the trippy uh, space flight. He loved that. It looked amazing in 3D. So if you can see it in 3D, go do it. If not, just go enjoy the movie, grab your popcorn. It's a good flick. Comment below and let me know what you thought of the movie. Like, share, subscribe. Tell your friends. And I will see you on the next video. RoboCop says, here's another video you might like, or you can check out the last video I made. You can subscribe to the channel, support us on Patreon, or check out all of the social media sites, the mailbox you can mail me stuff, and even the merch store. All that's in the description box below. Stay groovy.